Thanks very much. Well, we've seen the lathes, the buildings, the chimneys and the great wheel. All that ingenuity, though, was there to serve one purpose, and that was the extracting of ore from deep underground. And now it's time to go underground and see exactly what conditions were like. Here is one of the main entrances to the great Laxey mine, and with me are members of the Laxey Mines Research Group who've kindly agreed to take me down and show me the levels and the great chambers. Before we go, though, it might be interesting to look at this cross-section of the mine that was drawn in 1919, just 10 years before the mine finally closed. Looking at this gives us an idea of the vast scale of the underground workings. These lines represent the tunnels, or levels as they're called, joined by vertical shafts. The hatched areas indicate where huge amounts of rock have been removed and taken to the surface, leaving, in some cases, vast caverns. It's difficult to get an idea of the scale of all this until you notice the Laxey wheel up in the left-hand corner. Running back from the wheel is the 600-foot rod duct connected to the pumps. It's then you realise that this is a vast area of tunnelling, miles and miles of it. This shaft here is perhaps the deepest, and according to this plan, runs down 2,132 feet from the surface. And as this line indicates sea level, the shaft actually goes down 1,500 feet below sea level. We'll be entering at the level here, which is one of the main entrances to the mine. We're starting almost opposite Ham and Egg Terrace, and we'll be walking along here. Way above us will be the Laxey wheel and the rod duct, and we'll get as far as this chamber here, and by that time we'll be over 200 feet underground. One of the most vivid descriptions of conditions underground was given in a little book published in 1875 by Dr. Bradbury, his Guide to Laxey. In it he described the journey a friend of his took in the company of a miner. It was an experience which was both unnerving and gave his friend a great deal of respect for the work that the miners did. You're walking through water here, then, Peter.
At the appointed time, I met my guide at the level mouth. The entrance is very difficult, being a narrow path on which the wagons run, and is never dry at any season. But over this, some 300 or 400 people travel every day as they go to and from work. We came to the place where the deepest descent commences on ladders. I'd put on a pair of trousers and an old greatcoat to cover a white shirt, but I was told, "Off with thy waistcoat." And from the nature of the entrance to the deep mine, I saw that this was absolutely necessary, for the hole to go down was not more than 2 feet square. Having lit the candles and stuck them in front of our miners' stiff felt hats, we prepared to descend, after filling a bottle with the cold water which runs in streams from the rocks above our heads, and which had got down my back already. No sooner do our heads pass down the hole than out go the lights on both hats, and we are left in darkness.
Well, this small hole here with its original ladder sticking through is the very shaft that Dr. Bradbury's friend descended in the 1870s. According to the plans, it goes down over 1,000 feet. Now, he commented on the feeble light that a single candle gives, but in a way, he said he was quite glad. Some of the ladders down there are 120 feet in length, and he said if he could see the full 1,200 feet of the shaft, he'd have lost his nerve. When the pumps were switched off in 1929, the mine rapidly filled with water, and now all the lower levels are flooded and inaccessible. But even when the pumps were working, the water flowed down this tunnel as it was lifted to this level and allowed to find its own way out to the river. The miners were wet from the moment they started work. This small alcove here was a very important feature because it was somewhere the miners could stand when the steam trains came down the tunnel. As extraordinary as it might seem, 2 steam trains used to run along these narrow tunnels, pulling trucks filled with ore and taking them on down to the washing floors in Lower Laxey. The two engines were very small and were called the Ant and the Bee. They often had to run partially submerged in water. The engine driver worked with a points boy who sat on the last of the trucks. No candle would stay lit travelling down the tunnels, and often when the chains connecting the trucks broke, the boy would be left stranded in total darkness until his driver, arriving at the washing floors, realised that part of his load was missing. The quality of the air must have been bad enough in here already without having two steam trains, and the nature of the pollution that they caused is still evident today, because the top of the tunnel is completely covered by a thick, sooty mess that's been here since the 1890s. Just here you can see the marks made by a chisel. This may have been where a miner broke away the rock face to insert explosives, although from the 1880s compressed air drills were being used down here. Even so, there were some terrible accidents in this mine. In the early years, gunpowder was used before dynamite was introduced, and as the miners were working by candlelight, and many of them also smoked whilst they were down here, fatal explosions were inevitable. This piece of rock is typical of what might be found here. It's almost pure lead, and it's very heavy. After one of the explosions to loosen the rock, enormous chunks of this, weighing many tons, would be lying in the chambers. They'd all have to be broken, wheeled in barrows to the winding shafts, and hauled to the surface to be put into the trucks pulled by the steam train. The walls were often covered in beautiful colours as the minerals leached out of the rock, and miners often remarked on this. The fact that I can come into the mines at all today is due entirely to the work of the Laxey Mines Research Group, who've undertaken a labour of love over the past 14 years, excavating adits, refurbishing shafts, and generally making it safe to access a considerable area of the mines. They do it in the interests of heritage, and they work to a professional standard, and I'm sure that the original miners would be proud of them. Well, we've come several hundred yards in from the entrance, burrowing into the hillside. The Laxey wheel is a couple of hundred feet above, and this was one of the places the miners came to start their descent into the deep mine. They'd have gone up this ladder and into the chamber above, and they'd have used one of the most extraordinary machines that the Victorians ever built. Well, this rod is part of the man engine, which was a giant lift that took the miners up and down the deeper parts of the shaft. The engine itself is 200 feet above us in a chamber near the surface. It's still there today, even though it's all rusted solid. It is in fact a sophisticated and powerful pump, which was run by water brought to it under pressure from the hills above. At the bottom of the engine, a rod is connected which runs down 200 feet to this chamber. And from here, it runs down a further 1,200 feet, a total length of 1,400 feet. Now, when the engine was switched on above, this giant rod moved slowly and silently up and down 12 feet at a time. And every 12 feet down the rod, there was fixed a small platform that a miner could stand on. And every 12 feet down the side of a shaft, there were corresponding platforms. The miner got on here and went down 12 feet. He got off onto the small platform and waited for the rod to come up and present him with another platform that he stood on, and so they went down to the deepest part of the mine. And from there, they had another 500-foot climb on the remaining ladders. In this man-made chamber, they built this giant T-rocker, which acts as a counterbalance to the weight of the rods. One can only marvel at the achievement of lowering all this equipment down the shaft and of assembling this 1,400-foot rod in a 2,000-foot shaft, dangling from ropes by candlelight. It was achievements like this along with the great wheel, the miles of tunnelling, and the quality of the ore that was being extracted here, that made the great Laxey mine famous throughout the world. If your candle blew out down here, it must have been very disorienting, especially in the deeper mines where there was an endless warren of tunnels. Some miners described the silence as being especially eerie, and there were even reports of hauntings. Even today, when you're walking down a tunnel, you're never actually sure that you are the last in the group. Returning to the open air is always an experience. One seems to have a heightened sense of smell for the first few moments. The grass and the trees and even the air itself seems peculiarly sweet. No wonder Dr. Bradbury's friend ends his description of his visit underground by quoting from Hamlet when he says, "Methinks I scent the morning air."